Welcome into the College Football Overtime Podcast. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. Week 3 action. It is just a couple hours from getting underway. I mean, I think if you're watching this on Friday, then that means you got less than 24 hours before college football is back on your screen, unless you include a pretty awesome matchup that we'd have on Friday night. And we are going to get into that and so much more right here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. We have a lot of interdivisional matchups. Bama, Wisconsin, Boston College and Missouri, West Virginia and Pitt, and some rivalries that used to be inside of the division. Now they are outside of the division, a non-conference opponent. It's the Apple Cup. It's Civil War. All of that is happening week 3. We got a lot to get into. We're going to do it all right here on the week 3 preview show here on College Football Overtime. But before we do any of that, like I do every single week, got to welcome in my co-host, Abe Gordon. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, Garrett. It's a rare week where the best game may actually be on Friday night. So very interested to break this week down with you.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. So let's go ahead and should we start with that one? Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So right here, it is Arizona and it is Kansas State. And Abe, I'm just going to toss it directly to you, man. What are your thoughts on this one? I think this is going to be really a lot of fun. It's the first game for the Big 12 and Arizona.
Yeah, that's the thing, man, is like we've talked about it for 3 weeks now or really beyond, going back to the offseason of just how wide open the Big 12 is. This is the first big separation game in the Big 12, and you're coming off with both teams really struggling in week 2 compared to what you might expect. Obviously, Kansas State taken to the brink by Tulane, needed a good second half, a good fourth quarter to separate and win that game against Tulane. Arizona had their struggles with Northern Arizona. And as much as McMillan went nutso in week 1, that whole Arizona offense kind of had the shackles on last week. So it's two teams coming off some subpar efforts. Both are looking to kind of re-energize and restate what they're all about. But also, it is a huge first step into potentially reaching the college football playoffs. I mean, whichever team wins this game, you can potentially consider the favorite in the Big 12, especially with the most recent news about Cam Rising possibly working his way towards another medical year. But obviously Utah maybe takes a slight hit. One of these two teams, whoever wins Friday night, could be the Big 12 representative. So this is a very meaningful game.
Yeah, it's going to happen very early in the season. I mean, this is the kind of game that you would expect to really take place in October or even November. But look, here we are. Arizona, welcome to the show. Here's your big introduction. It's the reigning, one of the 2 years ago. So they won the Big 12 2 years ago when they beat TCU in a surprising game. But no, look, Kansas State's been one of the consistent contenders in the Big 12 conference here for a little while. So they're Avery Johnson, really solid at the quarterback position. He's going to be able to run this football really, really well. I expect that to be the point of emphasis here for Kansas State. But T-Mac he's got to take over. This is a game that last week he did not do that. Week 1, he did. He probably had a full season's worth of catches and yards and everything else for your average prototypical wide receiver. He had that in the first half. And he did that over the course of the game. He had nearly 400 yards of offense in that game. Just an unbelievable display of dominance. But then he was basically a no-show last week, and that is not something that can happen in this game. Noah Fafita and company, like this is a team, they've been riding this winning streak, of course, that goes back all the way to last season, goes back to a previous coaching staff and everything else. But this is the moment that you've got to prove it. You are here in the Big 12. This is your big statement game. And I know we're going to get into another game on here that's going to be a statement opportunity. There are a bunch of those types of opportunities in games this week of teams that can really assert themselves and establish themselves as teams who are here to stay, as teams who are, I'm going to be a contender this year, not just to make a run at a college football playoff berth, but potentially make a run inside of the playoff. But again, we'll get to that latter half of that conversation when it comes. But Arizona, Kansas State, these are two teams, like you mentioned, that are going to make a run for a Big 12 championship.
Yeah, and I just want to
Friday.
Yeah, and I want to make one clarification because make sure everyone's aware. This is not a game that will count in the conference standings. This is a previously scheduled game before Arizona moved into the Big 12.
Oh,
and so it now it's still gonna set your marks here.
Mhm.
But in terms of the conference standings, it will not make a difference. But I think whichever team does win, to go back to the original point, does kind of take the mantle for the moment, even if not in the standings, in terms of the favorite in the conference.
I think that's also a very important point there, Abe. Actually, that was one thing that I had forgotten in my notes here. No, that's really a very important thing. So this is just a bragging rights thing for a lot of these teams. Then, I mean, as far as the perceptions of the conference are concerned, you really hope that
And
it
I think
has
it's about
more
building
relevance.
momentum heading into the conference schedule too. I
Yeah,
think that's what this game gives you momentum. It gives you confidence, and it lets people know what you're all about.
yeah. Another game that's not going to count towards conference standings is Boston College at Missouri, but it does mean that it's two teams who were very eager to make a statement in their own conferences. Missouri seen by a lot of teams, a lot of media pundits like you and me, Abe, to be that kind of rung below, even though they're the number 6 team in all of college football. I mean, that by most metrics would mean, hey, you're a contender in your own conference. Well, in the SEC, it seems like they're on the outside looking in because, of course, you have Ole Miss, you have Georgia, you have Alabama, you have all these other Texas, you have these big time contenders. So Missouri, as far as teams who really want to make a statement, this is one of those teams. And then on the other hand, you have Boston College, a team who um, I mean, they just had a huge win over Florida State, a team that they actually dominated. Uh, but are they seen in that same light? I don't know if they are yet. I know they're for real under center. They can run the ball really well. But when it comes to really playing a marquee opponent, who are they? We thought we knew who Florida State was, but that's an 0-2 football team right now.
Well, look, obviously Missouri will be able to make itself known and either validate or invalidate when they get into conference play. But I do think this is an opportunity to do what Tennessee did last weekend against NC State, which
Yeah.
is before you go up with the big boys, you let yourself be known that you are for real. And the only way you do this with Missouri is if you are at home against Boston College and you absolutely throttle and dominate this game, similarly to how I know it was on the road neutral site. But
Mhm.
similarly to how Tennessee, there was no discussion as to those teams on the field last week. There was very clearly one was inferior and very clearly one was superior. And for Missouri, that's what you're looking to do. You mentioned it's not going to go into the conference standings, all that stuff, but if you want us to take you as real, the way we look at Ole Miss, the way we now look at Tennessee, the way you can jump into that conversation, it's by handling business. And like you mentioned, for Boston College, you look at what seems to be a wide open ACC right now. Clemson looked great against App State, but it's tough to remove what we saw them deal with against the Georgia Bulldogs. And
Mhm.
Miami looks like they're off and running, but the level of competition has been questionable at best. And so for Boston College now, this is their opportunity, and they've got a quarterback that can wreak havoc on pretty much any defense. And it's going to be up to Missouri, who's got one of the better defenses,
Yeah.
supposed to be. It's going to be up to them to bottle up Castellanos. He's not going to beat you with his arm. That doesn't mean he can't throw. Doesn't mean he can't hurt you with his arm. But he's not going to beat you solely with his arm. If you can bottle up his legs, you're going to win this game. But that is so much easier said than done. And if Boston College wants to jump in to that discussion with the likes of maybe Clemson, Miami, I guess possibly Louisville. They go in and not even if they win this game, but if they can compete, if they can take Missouri to the fourth quarter on the road in a hostile environment and look good doing so, yeah, they may lose that number next to their name this week, but they can gain some respect and gain a couple people's eyes as they enter ACC play.
Yeah, and last thought that I'm gonna have here on this game, it's Missouri specifically. It's the fact that this is a team that hasn't allowed a single point this year, but that's also coming against a Murray State team and a Buffalo team, which all due respect to those teams, they're not exactly what you're gonna see in SEC play, not what you're gonna see in FBS play at the highest level when you get to the Power Four. But look, Boston College has an opportunity, Missouri has an opportunity, but both teams can come out here and they can make a statement. And I think that at the very least, you're going to learn a lot about either one of these teams. I think that's really what it all comes down to. But another team that I feel like you need to be a little bit concerned about is the Alabama Crimson Tide. I'm just kidding. No, it's the Wisconsin Badgers, a team that they have some holes, they have some issues, and they have some injuries here on defense. It's going to be on that defensive line. It's going to be in that linebacker core. And this is not a team that you really want to be getting right against. An Alabama Crimson Tide team with Jalen Milroe under center, with that stable of running backs, that wide receiver core that can burn you over the top in the way that they can. Wisconsin, they can get beat in a lot of ways, but they can win really only in one. It's establishing a solid ground attack. And this game actually reminds me a little bit, to a lesser degree, but a little bit of what we talked about last week when it was Michigan and Texas. The home team, they have one really defined way that they can win this football game. It's controlling the clock, it's winning the ground attack, and it's sustaining yourself on offense and then preventing big plays on defense. Well, if Alabama gets a lead in this game, I think it's a wrap. I just don't think Wisconsin's built to come back. And I had a feeling that Luke Fickell and company, they were going to be able to come in and potentially be an upsetter, a team that could throw a wrench into the gears of some teams' playoff hopes. I don't think that they're one of those teams that can make their way in. But as far as being the reason that another team is left out, sure. But I just don't. I just have a hard time believing that they're going to be able to keep up with Alabama and Jalen Milroe.
Yeah, a couple of things here. I want to start with the Wisconsin side of things. Luke Fickell has had an incredibly difficult time jumpstarting this program since he took over. This feels like a moment for him where if at home, hostile environment, they can handle an Alabama team. Maybe that's the jumpstart that he's needed because this program has not taken off the way a lot of people thought maybe they could with Luke Fickell coming into the program. So that's point number one. And then for Alabama, coming off an incredibly disappointing performance a week ago. And I implore you for a second time, do not pay attention to the final score. That was a 5-point game with 6 minutes left.
Yep.
And Alabama has to be much better on both sides of the ball if they're going to do what they should do, as you referenced, go in, get the lead, play from ahead, and dominate this game. The difference is, in regards to the South Florida Bulls a week ago, they had a quarterback that was killing them with the legs. And Tyler Van Dyke, the Miami transfer there now at Wisconsin, is not going to do that. And so I do think it does set up well, as you mentioned, for Alabama to go in, handle business, look good doing so, and maybe reestablish a little bit of impressiveness that, in my mind, they lost a week ago.
Yeah, and look, if you talk about teams, and this is kind of a preview of what we're going to talk about here on college football game time coming up on Saturday on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game in Atlanta. It's about teams who need to prove it and teams who need to build back some lost faith. I think we talked about a Missouri team, a Boston College team, an Arizona or Kansas State. Those are teams that need to earn it. I think Alabama's a team that needs to build it back just a little bit, just because of what we saw last week. But again, that's going to take maybe a quarter or first half of action where Alabama just comes in and just lays the wood. There's a lot of faith in this Alabama team that they're going to come in and be exactly who we expect them to be. And I just have a hard time thinking that Wisconsin's going to be able to keep pace. It's just, that's
their offense doesn't work the way that USF's does. They just aren't going to beat Alabama as many ways. The lack of a quarterback run, which is so integral for USF, they just don't have. And so I just can't see him keeping pace.
So let's dive into a trio of old school rivalries that they've gone the way of the dodo, but we are getting them again this year for the best reasons too. Let's go into the backyard brawl. It's West Virginia at Pittsburgh. This is a renewal of the backyard brawl, one where I feel like Garrett Green is going to be one of the most important players here for West Virginia. And I kind of like West Virginia in this game. I'm pretty sure Pittsburgh won this game last year, but I think West Virginia was able to really reassert themselves on defense and then in that rushing attack. And it's led by Garrett Green under center. I'm fascinated about this game just because it's one of those old school games. And I think those kinds of rivalries for the fans are extremely important. So I'm very much looking forward to this one.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what sort of momentum Pitt maybe gathered. They were all on the ropes a week ago against Cincinnati. They scored 22 straight to get by the Bearcats. And I do wonder what they maybe have coming in. C.J. Donaldson for West Virginia, the running back, against Desmond Reed, the running back for Pitt. To me, it comes down to that. Whichever team is a little bit more consistent, able to develop and overall get some effectiveness out of their ground game. Hey, look, the backyard ball is always one of those games. First off, it ought to be raining. I don't know the weather report, but it's always that game that feels like it should be played in an ugly, gray-skied stadium. It was an ugly game last year, like 17-6 or whatever it was, something like that West Virginia got the better of. But Pitt has played well to start this season. I wonder if they have a little bit more momentum than they have in recent years. But yeah, I think it comes down to the running backs. I'm very interested to see how this one played.
Yeah.
This one could be another low scoring game, even with Garrett Green, who can light up a scoreboard on occasion. I don't know if that Saturday is the day.
Yeah, I'm interested in this one. I do think it's going to be a very low scoring game. Pat Narduzzi needs to come in here and make a good impression here because I mean he was a guy who very nearly lost his job last season, and you need to come in here and have a good impression in this game, and that starts in winning those kinds of rivalry games. And another coach who needs to make a good impression. Two new coaches here at Washington and at Washington State. The renewal of the Apple Cup. This is a game that used to be a conference matchup. Not anymore. Now, of course, Washington and the Big Ten Conference and Washington State in a new and improved Pac-12 conference, of course, with all the news that's come out. The Mountain West Conference adding or they're pillaging a couple of those Mountain West teams, Boise State and everybody else. They're going to be coming into the Pac-12 conference. Been look good for Washington State and company. They kind of waved that banner and they're still there. Lots of news still to come on that. But as far as Saturday is concerned, the Apple Cup should be a fun one.
Yeah, look, I know a lot of the focus for Washington in the offseason was on the addition of quarterback Will Rogers, but you look at that defense, and I know the competition isn't necessarily, what it's been, but they have not yet allowed a touchdown, and they're, gonna try and keep that going, but it's going to be very, very difficult. You got Kyle Williams, who hasn't quite broken out there for Washington State on the outside. But John Mateer, the quarterback there, man, he can get you with his legs. So they're going to have to defend both the quarterback run and the quarterback pass. It's going to be very interesting to see. This is a very competitive game this year, unlike in previous years. Well, sometimes even in previous years when it wasn't supposed to be competitive, it was. But this one's supposed to be competitive. I got my eyes on this one for sure.
Yeah, and it's not exactly what we saw last year between Cam Ward and Michael Penix under center. I mean, it's lost a lot of that juice that we saw last year, but with Will Rogers and John Mateer, like you mentioned, I mean that makes it a compelling matchup just for college football fans. But Jonah Coleman is the guy who I'm really going to be watching in this game. He's had a pretty solid start to his season, 231 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground there. I'm interested in this one just for that reason alone, just because it's an old school type of game and. Out there at Washington State. And I think it's sort of interesting in the sense that this is that first look that we're going to have of old rivals and one that got left behind and one who left for greener pastures. And I wonder if that factors in to the preparations for this week. Of course, you don't have the coaching staffs are different and everything else, but I mean, it's just an interesting thought here, but another one of those instances where you do have a new coaching staff on one hand and another hand, it's a team that's been struggling. Dan Lanning has not looked good this year. His Oregon Ducks have not been very effective. They came within a gnat's eyelash of losing to Boise State just after nearly losing to Idaho. And I don't necessarily think they were at risk of losing, but they just looked very sluggish and a little out of sync. At what point does it work for Dylan Gabriel? And at what point do you start really drawing some questions?
Well, look, if you're going to start raising that question, and look, I wouldn't do it until you lose, but you do have Dante Moore in the background, former 5-star transfer in there too. And so you do have a solid option, which not everyone has. The concern for me is Oregon allowed 196 yards maybe to Ashton Jeanty, somewhere up there. Oregon State's got a kid from right in our backyards here from Rome, Georgia, in Jam Miller, that has kind of been around the block. He's transferred a couple of times, both into and out of Oregon State. This is his second stop there.
Yeah.
Had some bad luck. Went to Ole Miss, got rolled his ankle behind Quinshon Judkins, never really saw the field after that. But if Oregon State is going to allow him to run the ball the way that Ashton Jeanty ran the ball, this one could be a little bit more competitive. And like you said, Oregon has not looked up to snuff, man. I mean, they started this season number 3. They almost immediately dropped to 7, then dropped again to number 9. They are one of the teams that maybe people thought could run up and down the field with Ohio State. They have not shown any little bit of that thus far. And what better chance to do it than in a rivalry game?
Yeah. I mean, this is another one of those teams like I talked about just a moment ago with Alabama, a team that looked very sluggish last week, but then turned it on in the fourth quarter to make box score watchers think there was something else entirely that happened in that football game. But Oregon's in that same ilk, a team that really needs to prove it right now, a team that needs to kind of regain some of that favor. And the Ducks, I mean, you can do it very fast. Just put them to bed. Do it. Come out of the gates exploding and get ready to go. And I think that this is another one of those things that's like, I don't know if you have sort of that spiteful sort of mentality. If you're Oregon State, like, you left me behind, and I don't know if they wear it like a badge of honor. I do think it's interesting that both of the home teams are the ones who were left behind. And I wonder if that's going to play into like the home field advantage in some capacity. But I think that, I mean, Civil War is always going to be a fun game just for football enthusiasts and people who enjoy solid pageantry and rivalry. But I wonder if Dan Lanning he has something to prove in this game, and you have to come out and show it, and you have to come out and prove it on the football field, because as of right now, Oregon screams that 2008 Georgia team that started off the season as the number one team in America and all the talent in the world, Matthew Stafford, and Oshon Moreno, and all these other Mohamed Massaquoi and AJ Green. I mean, there's tons of talent on that team, but when it all came down to what you did on the football field, they weren't up to snuff. And then they slowly trickled down the rankings until Alabama came to town and really kicked their teeth in. And that's kind of the way that Oregon is shaping up right now. They're trickling down right now, and that means they should win this game. But then Ohio State comes to town here in a few weeks. What happens then? They're going to punch your teeth in. Oregon, the way that they are playing right now, is not sustainable of a college football playoff team, much less a national championship contender. And of teams who need to come out and prove it, there is nobody who needs to do it more so in a bigger way than Oregon.
I think with a lot of these teams, these top teams, people misunderstand their offense. And I know you look at Oregon, you look at Georgia, you look at Ohio State, you see all these high-flying, high-scoring offenses, Texas as well. They are running offenses. And people may not really look at it that way. Oregon has not been able to run the ball this year. Bucky Irving, obviously, out to the NFL. I think that's the biggest key for them, is they have not been able to run the ball. Dylan Gabriel doesn't run it the way that Bo Nix was able to run it. Mm-hmm. And that's the biggest hamper on the efficiency on that offense.
Yeah. So let's move into the SEC here for just a moment. It's the University of Georgia, the number one team in America, a team that doesn't really have to prove a whole heck of a lot, just win. A team that already has one of the best wins of the college football season under its belt right now. Against Clemson. Now they go up on the road against Kentucky, a team who I expected to be a much improved football team this year, a team that just got absolutely railroaded, bombarded, and blasted by South Carolina last week. Now, game day is going to be there. We'll talk about that one in just a second, but this game's happening up in Lexington, Kentucky. The number one team in America is coming to town. What are your thoughts, Abe?
Yeah, two quick things. Obviously, Kentucky, if they're going to have any chance in this game offensively, they need to do a better job of protecting Brock Vandagriff. He only completed 3 passes, 3 of 10 a week ago. He was under assault all game long. If Georgia's able to get after him too, they're not going to stand a chance in this game. I will say this, for as much as Kentucky was dominated by South Carolina, and we just talked about this, about teams that want to run the ball, Kentucky did limit the Gamecocks to just 79 yards rushing, despite winning by 20-plus points. If they're going to have any hope in this game on the defensive side of things, they're going to have to limit the Georgia Bulldogs. The problem is when you ask Carson Beck to beat you, he can beat you. And so you're going to have to deal with that. Even if you can stop the run. But if they're going to have any chance at all with Trevor Etienne working his way back into form, they have got to stop the run.
Yeah. I mean, Kentucky, what you really need to do is Brock Vandagriff. What the heck, man? This is they had a 44 yards passing in this game. This is a game that they just got absolutely blasted. They turned the ball over so many times on the ground, and most of those were fumbles. You cannot do that. You can't do that. And this is a game that figures to potentially be wet. Weather might play a role into a lot of these games happening here in the Southeastern Conference, and at least it's the Southeastern United States. But it's not like South Carolina came out and dominated them in the biggest way. I mean, yes, they did on the scoreboard. 31-6 was your final score in that one. But you mentioned it too in some capacity. 252 yards of total offense, 86 rushing yards for South Carolina. It's not like they dominated them on the field. It's just, when you turn the ball over 5 times, that's something that blows the doors off of whatever game plan that you have. And speaking of something that's going to blow the doors off of any game plan you have, that's what Georgia's going to do. They're going to come up here. They want to establish themselves on the ground. They're just going to choke them out. And when it's all said and done, I don't really see Kentucky having an answer for what Georgia can do on the ground. They're not going to try to run up the score, I don't think. I think it's going to be a pretty vanilla game plan, and they're just going to try and dominate the trenches. But a game that I don't really have much of a feel for, Texas A&M at Florida. It's a game where the Florida Gators, if Texas A&M is able to jump on them early, this game is over. It's a game if you go up 7 or 10 or 4, much less 14, I don't see Florida coming back. And I think it's just a mental fortitude type of thing. The fan base is shaky at best right now. This is a team that's wobbling. DJ Lagway, is he going to be the starter? Is Graham Mertz going to be the starter? I'm very confused there. But on the other hand, is Connor Wegman going to be the starter for Texas A&M much longer? He has not done anything to impress or really to instill any sort of confidence. Talk about two teams who are shaky right now, just 3 weeks into the season.
Well, look, whichever quarterback is out there for Florida, the key is the offensive line. We've seen Montrell Johnson can be very dangerous with the ball in his hands. We've also seen the receivers for the Florida Gators make some plays, but you've got to give them time, and the offensive line has got to open the holes. It's going to be about the offensive line, and I think it's going to be very tough, quite frankly, for Florida to win this game on offense at the line of scrimmage. And so we'll see how that plays itself out. And then the Graham Mertz, DJ Lagway thing, we'll just have to see how that goes. It sounds to me like Mertz is going to be the guy, and then there'll be some Lagway drives and stuff like that. But look, to me, Florida has got to protect the quarterback, whichever one it is. They have got to push Texas A&M back to create those holes for Montrell Johnson and the rest of the running backs, and I just don't know if they can do it.
Yeah, it's not. This isn't exactly the same situation that we saw with Chris Leak and Tim Tebow. You know, like this is sort of a ugly situation down there in Gainesville. So I think Texas A&M is going to come in and win this game. That's my expectation. But Florida, I mean, hell, this is a team that might come in there and find a way. You just honestly have no idea. I have no feel.
Well, the biggest unknown is Lagway could still just catch fire
100%.
and take off. That's the one thing that's the real unknown aspect here. And we'll just have to find out, in game time.
We'll see. We'll see what ends up happening. But if you're Billy Napier, I'm gonna ride or die with the freshman. You got to see what the young guy can do. You got to protect your job in any possible capacity, because you have to. I think that ultimately this game comes down to who loses it rather than someone who goes out and wins it. Texas A&M and Florida. That's just kind of my feel on that one. But then the home of College Game Day for Week 3, LSU at South Carolina, a game that surprised a lot of folks. I was a little bit surprised they didn't go to the other Columbia, Missouri, home of a top 25 matchup, Boston College at Missouri, the one that we already discussed here on this podcast. Said it's the Tigers of Baton Rouge heading to South Carolina. And I think that this is a game where how much fool's gold is South Carolina?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I don't know enough about really either team to make some great declarative statement about what to expect in this game. But I will say this. South Carolina needs to have the quarterback run as part of their offense, because Rocket Sanders is not quite carrying the load maybe we thought he would be. And on the other side of the ball, we just talked about Florida and the offensive line there. If South Carolina's defensive line can't pressure Nussmeier, he's going to sit back there all day and cut him up.
Yes.
I think what we saw last week for the Gamecocks was a complete dismantling of an offensive line in Kentucky, and it affected the entire offense in their game plan. Mm-hmm. If they can't do that to LSU, which they probably can't, I think there's an opportunity for Nussmeier to get very comfortable back there.
Yeah, and that's 100% the situation. In a perfect world for LSU, John Emery, of course, he just tore his ACL for LSU. In a perfect world, that's what you want to see happen. You want to see Nussmeier be able to sit back in the pocket and pick you apart, because that's where this offense is really at its best. Now, obviously, they want the balance, but with Emery, you're starting running back having lost the rest of his season to the knee injury. That's just the best sort of situation for him as it stands right now. But then Lenore Sellers is another guy, which, I mean, buy the hype and the goggles, man. Let me tell you what, the goggles are getting people really hyped up over there in Columbia, South Carolina. But this is a game where you want to be able to run the ball. If you're South Carolina, you have to run the ball. You have to control the clock as best you can, because if you're LSU, you can't afford to lose this game, because you are slowly losing a grip on your season. And you started off the year with a loss to USC, and you haven't really had any opportunity since then to kind of regain any of that traction. This is your first real opportunity to come out and make a statement, and for Brian Kelly to prove that was an anomaly week 1, and we're right back to being LSU. I have not seen that yet from this team. I haven't seen that fight. I haven't seen that next level. The defense was a little bit improved, sure, but when are you going to unleash Harold Perkins, the best pure football player on the defensive side of the ball, thought by many at least, in all of college football? And I have not seen it yet on the field. This might be your first opportunity. Shut down that South Carolina rushing attack and really give yourself an opportunity to win this game. And you're going to do it in front of a national audience as well. It's college game day and everything else. But one more. We're just going rapid fire through all of these games. So if you're following along, thank you so much for doing so. Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, make sure you follow along all season long. We're trying to shoot through as quickly as we can, because we're just trying to be that rapid fire, having a little bit of fun here. Abe Gordon, Garrett Chapman here on the College Football Overtime Podcast Week 3 preview. We got a couple more to go. One more here for it. Well, not one more, but here, let's drop into this one. Tulane at Oklahoma, a game that Tulane, I felt like, had a real opportunity to win last week and win in a big way. They got robbed. They may not have gotten robbed. I don't know. That's not what I'm here to litigate. What I am here to litigate and discuss is Tulane's opportunity to go on the road and get a win over a top 15 opponent in Oklahoma. I think they have a great opportunity to do so. They can throw the ball really well, but I want to see what they can do against another really tough opponent in Oklahoma.
I just find it really tough, Garrett, to believe that they can muster the kind of effort that they had a week ago, even with the loss, and they had the late fumble, and the game got away from them at home. I think it's going to be very tough for them to muster that level of performance, especially going on the road. And for Oklahoma, who's got its own set of questions to answer, an opportunity to really put it on a good, or what is viewed as a good, Tulane team. I think they could come out of this weekend as one of the more impressive units if they can dominate through the air.
Yeah. I mean, that's really the biggest thing here. I mean, Tulane found success in the passing attack against Kansas State last week. Was that sort of a situation that maybe it was just the Kansas State passing defense, or have they really unlocked some extra level of potential down there? Oklahoma, Jackson Arnold, I mean, you have tons of talent under center, and you're about to get into the SEC slate. Now the going is going to start getting a lot tougher here for Oklahoma. You have to come out and impress in situations like this. I just want to see what Jackson Arnold can do. I want to see if, you've got all these transfer players and your Brent Venables and company. You've generally been a pretty solid team, but the way that you go from solid to great is by dominating matchups like this. Tulane, I agree with you completely, Abe. How do they find that next gear after the disappointment of last week? Sometimes it's really hard to get yourself up off the mat after getting punched in the face. And we're going to learn a lot about Tulane in this game. I don't think we're necessarily going to learn a whole heck of a lot about Oklahoma. This is a tough matchup for Tulane. You're beat up, you're bruised, your ego and physically. I don't really have a lot of faith necessarily that they're going to be able to get up off the mat here in another difficult matchup against Oklahoma. But last one here for us before we jump into some shout outs. Florida State, a team who I don't think that there is a team in all of college football who has their ego more bruised than Florida State and Mike Norvell. Now coming down is the Memphis Tigers team, who has a history of really taking it to these top teams. I mean, I don't know how many necessarily wins that they have, but if you want to get a Florida State team, they are as beat up and demoralized as I have seen a former top 10 team in a very, very long time.
Well, look, there's a couple of things. If in Memphis, I think this is a very dangerous game for Florida State, and they have not had the opportunity for the get right game in terms of, like, Florida, obviously last week with Samford, figure a couple of things out, maybe carry. They haven't had that opportunity. And Memphis comes into town with a pair of running backs that can pound the rock. And what has Florida State been able to do? Not stop anyone from running. And so it's not necessarily a great matchup for Florida State either. The question is, what have they figured out on offense? They have got to be more explosive than they've been. For them to win, the Seminoles, that's obviously the task. And then for Memphis, like I just mentioned, if they're going to run the ball the way that Georgia Tech ran the ball, the way that Boston College ran the ball, they're going to go into Doak Campbell and win this game.
Yeah, and it's Mario Anderson. I mean, that's the guy who has to come in and do it and get it done. You know, you mentioned the pair of running backs. Mario has, he had a $125 against a very
Greg
stout
DeRozier's too, man. Greg DeRozier's as well. And they're both.
No, 100%. Yeah, and Seth Hennigan. I mean, like, you have to look at these guys and you have to stay consistent, and you have to stay ahead of the chains against this Florida State team. And you're on the road. And I talked about Ben Hill Griffith. I mean, a place that it's going to be teetering a little bit. Florida State, is going to be teetering a little bit. This isn't a gimme game. This isn't that game where you're just going to come out and roll your helmet out of the field and you're going to get your subs in and everyone gets some snaps and everyone goes and pats themselves on the back and they can go to the tailgate later. Like this isn't that kind of game. Memphis is going to want to come in here. They're looking for blood. Florida State needs to do the same. Florida State needs to realize they've lost 2 conference games, but at the end of the day, like they have still plenty to play for. They need to come out here and this is a pride type of game.
I think for Memphis, there's also one of the more interesting things and aspects for me of this 12-team playoff is the race to be best group of 5 team. And we saw Boise State come up a little bit short in their opportunity for a marquee win. I think we saw Tulane a week ago come up a little bit short in their opportunity for a marquee win. Obviously, the game we just talked about, they would have another chance. I know Florida State's not the Florida State that's ranked and looks like nightmares, but this is Memphis's opportunity to go on the road for a marquee win against a Power 5 opponent and kind of state their case for why they maybe could be the top group of 5 champion when all is said and done. This is a big game for Memphis if you're thinking down the line in terms of that.
Yeah, and don't forget, too, Mike Norvell was the head coach of the Memphis program here for a little while before he took the job down at Florida State. This is where he was. He cut his teeth over there.
Yeah, him and Ryan Silverfield are really good friends.
They are. So
he was Norvell's O-line coach way back in the day.
Yeah, and that's why I think that this game has a lot of intrigue. I think it's a 12 o'clock kick, or is it 12:30, 12:45? It's in that 12 o'clock hour at some point.
Yeah,
I think this game has a good amount of intrigue, and it's not just to watch the fall of Florida State if Memphis were to win this game. But I will say this: if Florida State loses this game, that's when you really need to start having some serious conversations about what that athletic department is starting to think about Mike Norvell and his potential future at the program. Because I know he just signed that massive contract extension, but if you start a season 0-3 as a preseason top 10 team, a team that you were expected to come out and compete for national championships, and the bankroll that you've thrown at this team just throughout the portal and NIL and everything else, that is a very dangerous spot to be. I'm not saying he's going to get fired. I'm not saying that. I'm not even saying that they're going to lose this game because I don't think they will. But if you're Florida State, if you're Mike Norvell, this is a game that you have to come out, and I think that this is a statement game, a statement opportunity here for the Seminoles. Any more thoughts here on this one, Abe?
No, you got it.
All right, man. Let's wrap here, Abe Gordon. Week 3 shout-outs. I'm going to go first, and then I'm going to hand it over to you. I'm going to give it to Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame. And not in a good way. They thought that they arrived. They thought that they were here. They got the win against Texas A&M, and they expected to just roll the rest of the season. No need to worry about any other team. We have a little while before we actually have to get up for a game. And then Northern Illinois came to town. Northern Illinois, they didn't just come in here and take your lunch money. They came in, pulled your pants down, and pushed you down. That was about as embarrassing of a display as I have seen from a team who we thought had proved it week 1 with a road victory over Texas A&M. What we've actually learned is that Notre Dame is a good, not great program. They are a team that went on the road. It had a great game, but great teams play great consistently. Good teams can play great every now and then, but good teams can also play pretty poorly. And that's what we learned about Marcus Freeman and that Notre Dame Fighting Irish team. Riley Leonard, he's not just some messiah who comes floating down from the heavens and he plays great football and wins you games. Nope, you need a little bit more if you're Notre Dame, and this is your first opportunity to get right. You're not out of it yet, but you have no slip-ups. Your margin for error is nothing. It's nothing, if anything, for Notre Dame.
Yeah, I want to give 2 shout-outs. One, I want to highlight a game that's being played tonight, Thursday night, that a lot of people might overlook. Arizona State and Texas State. Though both teams come in undefeated, and Texas State has an opportunity to really get a very good home win in this one. It opened I don't know if it opened, but it currently was a pick'em at last glance. I know we talked a lot about the Friday night game, and rightfully so, but I think this Thursday night game could be pretty fun to watch as well. And then I just want to make sure everyone's aware, and just like, here we are again sort of situation with Cam Rising. He had hurt his hand because in a play, he banged it on like one of those big jug Gatorade coolers. And they went through the imaging. They said it wasn't broken. And they expected him to return. He was going to miss this week, and they expected him to return next week. But now there's like maybe some reports that he might be out a little longer than expected. And so we'll just have to see. We'll just have to see if he's able to get back out on the field. Because we talked about it. This Utah team is just not the same without him. We saw that last year, and it's just unfortunate. He thought maybe he'd get back in time for this week, but he's going to have to skip this one. And we'll see if he can be there when they get deeper into Big 12 play.
Yeah, it's one of those unfortunate situations for Cam Rising. It just seems like he's consistently been on the wrong side of things when it comes to his health, and that's just not the way that you want to finish out your football career. I mean, this is his last true year of eligibility. I don't know if he even gets another injury year necessarily. I guess you can apply for eligibility.
The medical, yeah.
If you can apply for it, but there's no guarantee that he's ever going to come back. And I don't see why the NCAA would let him come back if he did. I mean, maybe not. But the thing is, you're leaving your fate up to some unknown force. And it's one of those tough situations for Utah, because you thought that he was going to come in and be that sort of saving grace for this team. And he may still be, because if you're Utah, you still got plenty to play for. You still got everything in front of you. You haven't had that any nails in the coffin yet. You're not playing from behind right now. You just keep treading water, and hopefully Cam Rising can come back and just be healthy and give them an opportunity to play winning football down over there, their first year in the Big 12 conference. I don't know. They might have slipped down. I don't know if they're the favorites in the conference anymore. I think they've slipped to third or something like that. I think Kansas State has emerged as the betting favorite now, but we shall see there. The Big 12 is a very interesting conference. Very interesting indeed. Lots of different teams that could win it, and the margin for error is, like Notre Dame, very small. But thanks so much for listening. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. If you are listening for the first time, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, follow us along. We do this every single week. We preview all the games, and we react to the games every single week. So make sure you follow along. Like, subscribe, follow us along all season long. For Abe Gordon, my name is Garrett Chapman. Thanks so much for listening. We are College Football Overtime. We'll see you again next time. Talk soon.